Is it this simple an equation? Do deforestation and indiscriminate industrialization equal a pandemic? Because when people push into forests and live too close to animals and hunt them down, diseases cross or jump from human to animal. COVID-19 began with bats in a market in Wuhan, China. So, does the answer to stopping future pandemics lie in efforts to protect rainforests and arrest climate change now, not later, now? A CNN report quoting a multidisciplinary group of scientists estimates that a global investment of $30 billion a year, that's a little over 1.5 trillion pesos, into projects to protect rainforests, stop wildlife trade and farming would be enough to offset the cost of future pandemics. The amount too high, you say? The IMF estimates this COVID-19 pandemic will cost $28 trillion in lost output over the next 5 years. Let's put those numbers front and center, side by side, and make it as visual as possible. $30 billion a year, as opposed to $28 trillion for 5 years. Not hard to see which one weighs more heavily, right? Because when we protect forests, we protect humanity. I'm Pia Hontiveros. We'll be asking the hard questions for stories that matter to you. Front and center are COVID-19 and Mother Nature, a lesson for the future. Ending 2020 with hope and finding out what it takes to escape what scientists call an era of pandemics. Making businesses work for nature on the way to a green recovery. And what you and I can do to help forests heal as the world reels from COVID-19. While we always think of medicine's purpose as curative, we always think of medical practitioners as the frontliners, when in the actual and real world, medicine's purpose is preventive, and the frontliners are people, us, you and me, and our forests, because medicine will never catch up with new diseases emerging from the wilderness. How do we stay a step ahead? Front and center is global conservationist Sean Lee Davis. Davis founded Project Sea Change, a social enterprise and media platform that raises awareness in Asia about illegal wildlife trade and climate change. Sean joins us from Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Sean. Tell us first how you made the jump from luxury lifestyle coverage to Project Sea Change, which you founded 10 years ago.
Hi, Pierre. Thanks for having me on the show. Yes, this is a good question. As an editor of a luxury lifestyle magazine, I was, of course, traveling around the world, but seeing all the damage that was being done on the periphery and in the wild spaces turned my attention to the really urgent issues at hand and seeing what luxury lifestyle is essentially responsible for, and that's the destruction of habitat loss, the illegal wildlife trade, which is rampant in Africa. And most of that trade is coming from Asia. So I use the skills that I developed as a photographer, journalist, and a filmmaker to try and make the illegal wildlife trade, if you like, unfashionable and not trendy. So that's how I founded Project Sea Change. And we've done everything from TV shows to taking change makers out to the wild in order for them to go back and make the hard choices in their companies to help preserve nature and biodiversity.
And Sean, the C in Project C doesn't just stand for change, right? It stands for something else.
Correct. C is a very powerful letter, if you like, and really it stands for consciousness change, but also capitalism change. We need to change capitalism, the gears of capitalism, from the inside. And it's not a question of, we have charities. Charities are doing great work, but I think the focus of Project Sea Change now is to help elevate the consciousness of leaders, CEOs, and corporations so that they can change the mechanisms within which they do business and realize that all corporations, all businesses have to be net positive. Every business has to be a social enterprise, and it shouldn't be a separate kind of business in order for capitalism to change fast enough to do the urgent work of protecting what little biodiversity we have left on this planet.
That's right. CSR doesn't mean that's what the right hand is doing and the business is doing something else with its left hand. But Sean, CNS has this remarkable documentary called "The Coming Contagion." Let's listen to some excerpts, warnings actually, and lessons for the future.
So this is the forest.
Professor J.J. Muyembe is a world authority in the field of emerging diseases. He's been tracking them since he discovered Ebola in 1976.
So it's become an outbreak.
But clearly, therefore, if you don't protect the forest, you're going to increase the number of potential contacts between a hunter in the forest and pathogens within the forest.
Yes.
And that's going to lead one day to the big pandemic.
Yes, the big pandemic, yes.
Are you afraid that there is going to be more emerging diseases coming out of the forest? Something that is perhaps spreads like COVID but kills like Ebola?
We are now in a world where new pathogens will come out that will constitute a threat for humanity. And as you know, most of these diseases emerge from Africa.
Are you afraid of unknown diseases, new ones coming out of the forest like COVID?
Yes, indeed. You should be afraid. That was how Ebola came. It was unknown, an unknown disease. And then after tests, it turned out to be a virus.
And there are still many more?
Yes, monkeypox.
Sean Lee Davis of Project Sea Change, we can't deny it any longer. All pandemics arising out of unsustainable human activity. As far as you know, what is the status now of the world's wildlife and coral reefs?
The picture is quite bleak, I have to say, and I've had the privilege of having gone to many of these remaining habitats across the world. That we're talking about coral reefs. Most coral reefs disappearing by the end of the century. And of course, coral reefs provide huge amount of protection from storms and also support a huge amount of biodiversity in the oceans. In terms of the last remaining rainforests, we see the Amazon continues to burn. We see the last remaining rainforests in Asia being stripped for palm oil. And not only are they carbon sinks, but they are also clean our water and produce the oxygen that we breathe. So in essence, if we carry on as usual, we are waging a war on nature that is essentially suicidal. And the UN Secretary General recently said, basically that Antonio Guterres said that humanity is waging war on nature and nature always strikes back. And we've seen how nature strikes back in the form of the pandemic. It's no surprise that we had a pandemic. We've been warned by scientists for many, many years that there would be a pandemic if we carried on destroying habitats and irresponsibly farming the last remaining topsoils, and it has happened. Now, I hope the lesson from this is that we take the warnings about climate change seriously. And I think one of the major problems with this pandemic has shown that people have sort of lost faith in the science. Governments have lost faith in the science, and we need to really put science back on the top shelf and start listening to the scientists. Climate warming is happening, and if we don't heed the warnings, something bad is going to happen. And as we know, 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade of warming by the end of the century if we don't reverse course.
Mm-hmm. Sean, so many questions from what you've said, no? Like, for example, why didn't we learn the lessons from SARS? Like you said, there have been so many warnings already. There is also, people don't understand, we can talk about the rainforests in Africa, but people don't understand that there is a connection, like you've said before. There is a connection between what happens in Africa and what happens here in Asia. And about preventing pandemics, people say it's costly, it's time consuming, we can't see the impact, you guys are alarmist. How do we argue with things like that?
Unfortunately, humanity is fairly short-sighted and we forget very quickly. And as you correctly mentioned, I was in Hong Kong during SARS and that was very tragic and very scary. And thankfully, it did prepare Hong Kong a bit better than other countries and other cities for this pandemic. But it didn't really change the world's habits. And what can I say to that except that we have short-term memories. We need to understand that everything is linked, inextricably linked. So if we're cutting down forests in a faraway country, that will impact our lives wherever we are. We've learned now that the world is finite and we can't just keep over-consuming as we want without consequences. In terms of preparedness for the next pandemic, in terms of preparing for the next pandemic,
Yes,
we see
Sean,
that global governance is speaking. Oh, sorry, there's a delay. Sorry, carry on, Pia.
All right. Well, just as a final question, and then you can add what you're saying now to the answer to that final question. It's not just the short-term memory that we have, right, as human beings. There's something, you said something before in an interview, in a past interview, we have some kind of a gene. And also, so tell us about that. And also, we can't, what you're saying is we can't abuse Mother Nature without avoiding payback, right?
Correct. You know, humanity, we're essentially born consumers, right? It's in our nature to consume. Unfortunately, capitalism has turned those consumption habits into an extreme superpower. We are super consumers. And so that's why it's important that we rein in capitalism and capitalistic greed in order to, but also harness the economic potential of turning economies into green economies. And I think that's where, where we'll be focusing is helping corporations and governments really form this new green reset, like a green stimulus to help countries create more jobs from renewable energy sources, from protecting biodiversity so that these spaces can live and breathe and these animals can live in the wild without being chopped down. At its essence, you refer to the gene. Well, you can argue that humans have an insanity gene. That's what it's called. I don't think that we do have that. It's just we're not aware of the consequences of our actions and the consequences of those actions in a faraway place. So if we understand that we're all linked, consciously or not, or even as consumers to the rest of the world, then hopefully we'll act in a kinder way. And we need governments to lead the way, not by putting trillions of dollars into the financial system, which is what you're seeing now. You're seeing the stock markets rocket during this pandemic, but actually putting that money into renewable energy, not into the fossil fuel economy, but into the renewable sectors and spurring growth in this kind of great opportunity for a greener New Deal.
So many lessons from this pandemic. Thank you very much for sharing them with us and for joining us here on Front and Center. Global conservationist Sean Lee Davis, founder of Project Sea Change. Well, the stories that matter are front and center, why nature is everyone's business, and the next phase of sustainability. Also, what you and I can do to help nature heal, and in the process, help us heal too. Stay tuned to CNN Philippines, news you can trust.
Be an earth warrior so you can protect the earth and tell other people to do the same. Our masks and face shields could end up as waste in oceans and landfills. So here, we make sure to dispose of these items properly. Seen what happens when we give our planet a break, so why not do it permanently?
What I learned from the pandemic is to not take things for granted. If you have something one day, you might not get it the next. If you take care of the environment will take care of you.
We keep the stories that matter front and center. I'm Pia Hontiveros. Welcome back to the program. As the world continues to adapt to living with COVID-19, business leaders are taking action to prevent another pandemic. Now, if we want to stop a future pandemic, we need to start at the origin, the starting point, the animal that will be the source of a deadly pathogen. To protect that animal, we need to protect its environment, and that's what's called conservation. Front and Center is the Business for Sustainable Development, a non-profit group that helps the biggest companies in the country develop a sustainable business blueprint. Joining us on the show is Bonar Laureto. Bonar, thank you very much for being with us on Front and Center. Define first what sustainable means, because it's not a word that sits well with some precisely because of habits and deeply ingrained ways of thinking and practices.
Thank you. Thank you, Pia, for having me. Sustainable is very confusing for many people because it has many different meanings. But in the context of business, sustainable means being able to ensure that you have continual access to the resource that you have, to ensure that your business is always relevant in addressing the needs of society. So profitability comes after when you have ensured that your business is able to respond to the needs of society and environment.
All right. Well, of course, Bonner, COVID-19 has forced not just individuals, but companies, such as the ones you deal with, to reimagine how they can do business sustainably. What does a sustainable business blueprint look like?
A business that is working towards embedding sustainability ensures that, number one, it operates in an ethical manner, and therefore it's able to make decisions for the goodness and equitability of every stakeholder. Second, that it is able to manage its impacts, mostly negative impacts to the environment, to people, and to the economy. Third, that it is able to put out products and services that improves quality of life, that meets human needs, and creates a society where equality and equitable access to opportunities are fostered. And finally, a business that is sustainable ensures that it is able to assess or provide a scenario analysis of the future and be able to provide the right strategies that will ensure that it will continue to succeed in whatever scenarios of the future there may be.
Are you saying, Bonar, that because all companies have CSR, no corporate social responsibility, are you saying that CSR actually becomes front and center already for many, if not most businesses, most companies, precisely because of this pandemic?
Corporate responsibility as a principle, yes. But sometimes CSR is more understood from the context of philanthropy. The point we're making is that philanthropy is not going to cut it. The role of business has got to be
right
in its core abilities, in core resources to effect positive change in society. So, for example, if you're a toll road company, you don't go and you're not limited to going and doing medical missions. That's well and good from a philanthropic standpoint. But if you're a toll road company and you facilitate the transition to low carbon mobility by investing in charging stations for electric vehicles, which is fundamental to transition to low carbon mobility, that's where your role is. And that's what sustainability is all about. Being able to be part of the transition towards creating a sustainable world from a core business rather than philanthropy.
Yeah, that's the same thing that Sean D. Davis of Project Sea Change said earlier on in the show. Also, Bonar, I have here a statement from Peter Dajak. He's the president of EcoHealth Alliance, and he says, and we quote, "We can continue to eat meat, but we need to do it in a way that is far more sustainable if we want to get rid of pandemics. Global for-profit companies care about what we, the public, think about them. They respond when people call them out." How do you see a statement like this, and what does it mean to you and the kind of work you do for all these companies?
Yes, companies do respond to what people not just say but do, and they respond to the kinds of behavior that people put out there. So people might say things like they said surveys would show that they would be willing to buy more expensive but greener, more sustainable products. But it doesn't show according to consumer behavior and choices when they're in the grocery stores, for example. So if people really wants come to influence the decision making of companies, it has got to be lived by. It has to be part of the behavior of the people rather than just saying things what they want. So a lot of people are saying they don't want single-use plastics, but at the end of the day, they continue to buy unnecessary plastics. Then that wouldn't change any corporate behavior. It has to be something that they live by.
As my final question to you, Bonar Laureto, we opened the show showing these graphics about what it's going to cost, what it's going to cost to prevent another pandemic, $30 billion versus $28 trillion in losses in the next over the next 5 years, 2020 to 2025. Because of this pandemic, and you can see the disparity in the figures. What does this mean to you and the kind of work you do for all these companies?
First and foremost, if you look at protecting nature as cost, then it will never be something that the business will go into. You have to create the kind of business case that will make investing in nature interesting for private sector. And there are three major business cases where instead of looking at investing in nature, protecting nature as cost, they look at it as an investment. Number one, companies invest in nature as a way to protect, to manage its negative impacts. So if it's if it's an investment that ensures that they can continue to operate because they're able to manage negative impacts, then that's something that business will actually invest in. Second, if they are doing it because it improves their product value proposition, a real estate company, for example, investing in ecosystem restoration because it becomes part of the value proposition of their properties, then it makes business sense. Then it's not cost, it's an interesting investment proposition for business. And third one will be really that companies need natural capital. If you can establish the business case or the dependence of these companies' business model with what ecosystems can provide, what nature can provide, for example, water. Energy companies in hydro, for example, requires water, and water can only be made available and sustained for an extended period of time if you have the watersheds. Therefore, investing in watersheds is no longer cost. It's viewed by the company as an investment. It's part of their business cost. And therefore, it's not an external cost, but it's internalized into the business model of companies. That's how you leverage finance for biodiversity from the private sector.
Agree. Well, any money poured into nature and health is an investment, like you were saying. Bonar Laureto, Executive Director of the Business for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much for joining us on Front and Center. Well, the stories that matter still front and center. The simple ways, the simple things you and I can do to fix this pandemic and stop, preempt, or prevent the next one. Join us in the discussion after this short break. Welcome back to Front and Center. We want answers on the stories that matter to you. I'm Pia Hontiveros. The new year presents a unique opportunity to build a better world post-COVID-19. What we want to do is to preempt future pandemics so that we don't need to scramble around for test kits, protective equipment, ventilators, and get caught up in a mad rush to save the human race via a vaccine. What can we do now? A lot. Front and center is the World Wildlife Fund. In June, the global conservation group warned that conditions are rife for the next pandemic unless urgent action is taken. Angela Ibay of World Wildlife Fund Philippines, WWF, now front and center. Angela Orgia, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Well, let's begin with this. Now, we here in the Philippines, we may not be fighting to preserve the rainforests of Africa, but how do we understand the connection between what happens there and how COVID-19 has impacted us here in this country?
Well, I think the clear thing is that the awareness and consciousness about the link between the health of our planet, the health of our environment, is clearly linked to our own health as well. We know that with what has happened in the pandemic, nature really matters. And unfortunately, WWF did come up with a report called the Living Planet Report. And it really showed that we have a broken relationship with biodiversity, with nature, and we have to restore that. And I think this is a great opportunity to be able to do that. And there have been little steps that people have been doing, not just creating awareness, but actual actions that I hope would continue throughout the years so that our relationship with nature would continue to be strengthened.
Well, maybe we can contribute to creating more awareness and making things much more clear. Let's bring up this graphics that we have, the coronavirus transmission cycle, a little show and tell here in front and center. Gia, why is this important for us to understand the connection between the animals and humans and how diseases emerge?
Well, we've learned from science that around 70% of infections that have infectious diseases that are affecting people actually come from animals. The term zoonotic actually emerged a lot, and people started to learn that, a lot of these pandemics are a result of these zoonotic diseases, and that is the link and the relationship by which what's happening in our nature has jumped and affects us. But I think more than that, it's really getting people to understand also that this is exacerbated not only by biodiversity loss, but also by the effect of climate change. And many of us have to understand that there's a way by which we can lessen those impacts. And we can do this also by calling not just on our governments, but also doing it on an individual basis.
Okay, the same reasons why we have climate change, those are exactly the same things that impact us when it comes to pandemics, correct, Gia?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, people, we are encroaching into habitats. The human race is actually like 70% of all land is now being occupied by people. Our cities are urbanizing. So there is a point in time wherein people and animals and the organisms that come from them will actually interact very closely to create these zoonotic diseases that will jump and therefore affect humans. And so we have to really be able to understand how biodiversity, how our nature and how our environment really evolves, and how we can be able to not just only protect ourselves in terms of health, but also protect our environment and also nature. Because we should treat nature not just as an enemy, but really an ally, because we have a lot of things that we can learn and get from nature to be able to increase not just our well-being, but also, prosper as well as a human race.
Okay. Sometimes when we talk like this, Gia, people get a little bit upset or they don't understand. No? So let's bring it down to the individual level. So obviously responding to pandemic, when it emerges is not the answer. So, we shouldn't be scrambling for PPEs and vaccines, etc. But there is a way to preempt and prevent it. But like I said, so on the level of the individual, what is it that each one of us can do in our daily lives to prevent and preempt the next pandemic?
I think one of that is, well, of course, aside from the increasing our awareness and being more conscious of our own impacts, there are daily things that we can do. It was earlier mentioned that we should be able to invoke and protect our forests. I mean, in the Philippines, unfortunately, our forests have really been marginalized. And really, we need to be able to clamor and say that we need to protect our forests and other natural habitat. But there are also what we call nature-based solutions that we can implement also in our cities, in our communities. And we can also do other things. On an individual basis, we always say this in WWF, for example, you can lessen your carbon footprint by being more energy efficient, conserving energy, using even when we buy things. I mean, it's the season for giving and buying. Make sure that you buy things that are, would be helpful to the environment. Also lessen our use of, unnecessary plastics, our reliance on those as much as possible. And even supporting local produce. We're coming into the new year, and many of us will be preparing for medianoche and, evening meals. Support local produce because that also supports our own farmers and fishermen folk. And therefore, if you're doing that, you're actually creating a sustainable food system, which can last us and be able to help us. And I was very glad, actually, in a way, people started, doing their own home gardens, because that's very, very good. If you know where your food is coming from, you know that the nutrients there is you yourself was being able to take care of that. And I think those are the little things that when you build them up and the community actually galvanizes and gets together, that actually can help also us be able to be more resilient against, future pandemics, hopefully.
Thank you for joining us in Front and Center, Angela Gia-Ibay, Climate and Energy Program Head of WWF Philippines. Are we scaring ourselves silly? Well, doctors insist we should fear the unknown disease that may emerge from a rainforest. The disease that WHO calls Disease X, and X stands for unexpected. And the lesson, so difficult for so many to digest and learn, is that we should never bite the hand that feeds us. If we don't get in the way of or interfere with Mother Nature, there will be no pandemic payback. This is Front and Center. I'm Pia Hontiveros. Thanks for joining us. We welcome 2021 with hope. And on behalf of the staff and crew of Front and Center, we'd like to greet each and every one of you an advanced Happy New Year.